Cool. All good. Well, yeah, conscious of time, so keen to sort of get cracking. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. To introduce myself, I'm Duncan Stobin, one of the senior solutions architects here at Saepio. So back in March, we held our annual flagship event. This time it was the House of Commons. The day itself was oversubscribed, so we had our speakers have kindly offered their time today to deliver some of the content again through a slightly revised webinar format. So in previous years, each of the, I suppose, annual events will be sort of centered around a specific theme. So for example, last year we did the topic around security automation, and then we invite our partners there to effectively demonstrate how they can support and deliver on these initiatives. This year, however, we took a slightly different approach when planning it out. We observed a lot of our key partners have made some significant advancements in their offerings. So I suppose rather than centering on a specific topic, we wanted to give them a bit more flexibility to I suppose really showcase the innovations that they're most excited about. So these capabilities the guys will be running through today are ultimately designed to help customers deliver, I suppose, better outcomes, but also address some of the challenges they're already helping with, but doing them more effectively and ultimately extend the potential value really that the customers can get from their platform. So in terms of the format today, we've got 4 speakers on with us. There's plenty of content to cover. So as a result, we won't be able to do like an interactive Q&A, but we'd obviously encourage all attendees to drop any questions they may have as we go through the content. And what we'll do is we'll ensure that, I suppose, all of these questions are captured and we'll follow up with answers them all to you individually. So I suppose with that in mind, I'll hand over to yourself, Dylan, to crack on with the first presentation.
Perfect. Am I coming across loud and clear?
Yes, you are indeed.
And let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, can see your background. There we go.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I am Dilan Nathoo. I'm one of the pre-sales leaders here at Crowdstrike. Everyone knows us for EDR, but sticking with the theme, I'm excited to talk to you today about our AI advancements to help analysts get access to crucial data, detect threats faster, prioritize vulnerabilities, and ease the analyst workflow. So Crowdstrike, the platform is cybersecurity's AI consolidator, purpose-built to stop breaches. A single platform, lightweight agent collects and integrates data from across the enterprise, including endpoints, cloud workloads, identities, and third-party sources. By unifying disparate data sets, building conversational AI and automation on top of that, security teams will be able to ask any question of all data and drive automation across the SOC to gain the speed required to beat the modern adversary. The platform consolidates and replaces legacy point products across 3 key areas, including security, IT, and in terms of threat response and threat intelligence. The platform delivers a unified, modern approach that reduces complexity and cost, saves time, and stops the breach. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 common steps of a traditional analyst workflow that consumes many cycles. The first area we'll go through will focus on data ingestion. Then we'll talk about how to leverage the data to identify incidents and respond to those threats. Next, we'll touch on how to improve our ability to triage and respond to those threats. And finally, how to build proactive security postures to prevent those incidents from occurring in the first place. Hopefully, you've noticed that these steps are all linked together in a natural progression, and that's done by design. We want to try and address every step of the process and make sure that you don't just solve for some and leave you bottlenecked elsewhere. Now, we all, I think, can agree that data is part of the foundation for information security and decision-making, but alone, data is a slippery slope. And an increasing volume of that data threatens to drown organizations in noise and spiraling cost. You want the right data in the right context to maximize value and get better outcomes. To do that, you have to collect and normalize inputs from a variety of sources before you can get or even start generating insights and making decisions. We'll come back to the insights and the decision making in a little bit later. But before we get ahead of ourselves, Let's not forget that integrating data in the first place can be a major challenge for many organizations. At least that's what I keep hearing when I speak to organization after organization. We need to know that getting telemetry and logs from new data sources into a usable format for that security platform can be time consuming. In fact, it's often one of the biggest obstacles to migrating tech stacks or adopting new and improved capabilities. You need an in-depth understanding of the source and destination formats, the schemas, and a thorough understanding of the associated specs and documentation. Not alone the good access to some sample sets and time to painstakingly map each field one by one. It's a lot of time and sometimes a lot of trial and error. That's why I'm excited to unveil that with Crowdstrike, we are revealing our new AI-generated parsers in conjunction with our Semantic Data Modeling Framework, or SDMF, to accelerate next-gen SIM and log-scale parser creation. It will create a faster and more frictionless experience in ingesting and understanding your data. Here's a screenshot that shows you a quick example of this concept. Let's imagine that there's data streams coming in from 3 different sources. One of the fields labeled is IPv4, another one is labeled IP address underscore v4, and the third has some cryptic fields. Most of us in this room intuitively understand just by looking at these field names or values that they are all IPv4 addresses. That is, the semantic meaning of these 3 different data points are all IP addresses. Without a semantic data model, there is no standardization, making it difficult to connect and exchange data from varying internal and external systems. This makes it hard to uncover relationships and patterns between entities. And it's also an important foundation of our AI-generated parsers. The core of our innovation here is to combine the semantic data modeling framework with tuned, and I use the word tuned, large language models, or LLMs. With this, we can accelerate the creation of parsers of data coming into the Falcon platform from new sources, even if we've never seen it before. This empowers organizations to get the quickest and best use out of their existing data and new investments. With a few lines of sample data, users will have the ability to map to the log to Crowdstrike's parsing standards. Once a parser has been created, users can easily add that to our next-gen SIM platform or log scale. Okay, kind of changing gears. Step 2 in this process. Now that we've made it easier to bring in more data into Falcon, it's time to tackle potentially the hardest challenge in security. What do I do with it all? Introducing Crowdstrike Signal. It's a new family of AI-powered engines that generates and normalizes automated leads and incidents. It does this by combining existing alerts, indicators, and even raw telemetry into a self-learning model tailored to your individual environment, even your individual assets. Signal is a culmination of 4 years of work from our advanced research and development teams. Signal was purpose-built to help analysts with 3 main goals. 1, reduce alert fatigue, surface novel and stealthy tradecraft, and last but certainly not least, do it in a technology-agnostic manner. A simple way to think about this is to compare Signal to a system that processes audio waves. In an audio wave, the peaks represent the loudness or the volume of the source. Think of this as representing how often we see particular alerts or indicators fire on a host or in an environment. In music, each of these audio waves might represent an instrument or a channel. In our case, each one represents a specific indicator of attack or IOA. Now, it's important first to understand, if I just played these audio sources at random times, it would sound like noise because everything is out of sync and interferes with itself. So first, we'd have to make sure that all the tracks are synchronized time-wise and use an equalizer to level the volume of all the sources. This is to us called normalizing the data. In the case of Signal, that would mean mapping it to 3 main key priorities of time, a distinct IOA, indicator of attack, and a target entity, such as an endpoint. If you look carefully, you may have spotted some areas where the peak waves align or amplify each other. This is like symphony with all the instruments in harmony. We can see it more clearly when we combine all of the sources into a single one. It's a much more obvious. But there's still a lot going on. So the last step is to apply a cutoff or threshold to filter the background noise. If you're a hi-fi audio geek, you'd call this a high-pass filter. It cuts off the background noise we don't care about. Once we do this, we have a clear area sticking out. This is the incident we'd want an analyst to look and investigate. Here is a screenshot of what it looks like in the UI. It's called our new automated leads, and it will bring it is going to be the home for Signal and other machine-generated leads for analysts to hunt. We've been benchmarking Signal internally on real data, and we are already seeing a difference it makes. It is taking the heavy lifting out of surfacing and aggregating events, indicators, and detections into prioritized leads. In fact, in every 15 to 20 you'd have to sort through and correlate manually, you'll only be looking at one automated lead generated by Signal. That's a 95% reduction in volume or a 20% time improvement in efficiency. This is also expected to be included in third-party data ingested in our next-gen SIM. Now that we've described, in terms of the benefits of not just about any tech and innovation, it's also always about in terms of being better, cheaper, or faster. Speed comes up so much because time is the scarcest resource in the world. You can't buy more of it. You can't recycle it. You can't get it back after it's spent. The best you can do is conserve it and use it to become more and use it more efficiently. This is especially important since adversaries are moving faster than ever before. Every second counts. And while detections might be one of the most technically challenging things, the next step in the analyst workflow is response. It's usually the most time intensive. Responding to leads and alerts and remediating incidents is really time consuming. It's very dependent on skilled humans, but the problem is that there's usually more systems to touch than there are people. And at the rate an IT system grows, it far outpaces the rate that we can introduce more skilled labor into the work pool. The ratio between IT system and IT staff vary widely. It's usually no less than tens of endpoints to every worker and can sometimes even be in the thousands. And security teams is even more specialized. It's been even harder to drive more innovation in terms of where do I spend my time and where do I spend my best bang for buck. That's why at Crowdstrike, it's been the driving factor behind our motivations, which is to develop on Charlotte and our Charlotte AI models. With this in mind, I would like to introduce detection triage. One of the biggest challenges for SOCs is manually reviewing detections, classifying false positive, and escalating true threats. That's why we built Charlotte AI Agentic Detection Triage. Here's what AI-powered detection triage looks like in action. Detections are automatically analyzed with a 98% accuracy in distinguishing true versus false positives. 1 second. Delivers a triage recommendation based on industry best practices, and it saves over 40 hours per week per customer on average. The final workflow that I want to tackle is how to best fortify your posture and harden against attacks. Attack paths are all about thinking like an adversary, something that Crowdstrike pioneered since our founding with an adversary-driven approach to building better security technology. The ultimate goal or final step of an adversary kill chain is something known as achieving actions on objectives. We often talk about an adversary's objective as being one of your crown jewels. That could be a critical production system like a database server or the sensitive data it contains, for example. But adversaries don't just magically appear in your environment. It's a multi-step journey that usually starts somewhere in your perimeter and takes a journey through your networks, your identities, your different controls and systems. That journey is what an attack path illustrates. The concept behind attack path is simple in theory. If you know the path the adversary takes, you have multiple opportunities to stop them along the way, thus stopping the breach. In practice, it's not so simple. Scale and complexity, as always, is the enemy. As your network grows, the number of objectives and potential attack paths also grow exponentially. This is reminiscent of everyone's favorite game of vulnerability management whack-a-mole, when you are dealing with more CVEs than you can ever patch. Where do you focus your time to get the most proactive bang for your buck? The shift is clear. Instead of waiting for the alerts, security teams can now shut down attack paths before adversaries ever reach them. I hope you're excited about the amazing innovations we went through over today in a very, very brief, short, condensed version. With these improved AI-powered workflows, we're hopeful you'll master your data ingestion, prioritize faster and more accurately, triage and close the loop by hardening your posture. It'll also bring you to be continually think differently about generative AI and continue to lead the industry with Crowdstrike. These innovations can cut down hours of work for analysts and propel the AI native SOC forward. All of that data adds up to one thing: stopping the breach. As an industry, we're still in the early stages of how AI will be part of every security experience. CrowdStrike's commitment to all of you is that we're focused on harnessing AI to accelerate every step of your workflow for you and your teams in the safest and the most efficient way, resilient by design and at scale for the future of security. I appreciate your time today. Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to hand back over to you, Duncan.
Wonderful, thanks, Dylan. Yeah, unsurprisingly, internal resource challenges is something that comes up all the time across our customer base. So yeah, interesting to see how potentially customers can leverage that to, free up analyst time and focus on other priorities, etc. So no, really appreciate your time. Andy, I think it's over to yourself now. If you've got your content ready to go, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Duncan. Right, so let's lead on with the Netskope story then. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. So I am Andy Aplin. I'm the VP of Solutions Engineering here at Netskope. I've been here for a very long time, for nearly 11 years now. And what I wanted to go through here is that we've established ourselves in the market now as a leader in the secure access services edge market. So we came to market as a cloud access security broker, but it was a platform that we built. And as a platform, the market has emerged and sort of it's, I guess it's matured at the same time. And what we've seen is that now when we talk about security, with regards to sort of implementing security in real time, we think of two areas. We think of Security Services Edge, the SSE, and then we look at the Secure Access Services Edge. But what I wanted to talk to you about is how we've extended our capabilities into data security posture management. So I'll try to build the story for everybody, just to make sure it's a clear understanding of where we've come from and what we're talking about here. So when we look at the infrastructure today, we know that there are two key components to any infrastructure. Clearly, we have networking. We've got to get the connectivity from source to destination by some type of method. And then during that connection, what we want to do is we want to invoke the security to make sure that the right level of controls are in place and that people are not exposed to any exploits, or they're limited into the risk that they may be exposed to. So when you look at this, what you can see is that we effectively become the intersection point So any of those situations at the bottom here, you know, an unmanaged device, a managed device, somebody working remotely, somebody within a headquarters, or any other environment, you know, the likelihood is there will be a requirement, of course, to reach a service. And that service could simply be a website, or it could be, you know, a chosen SaaS application like Office 365, or it could be that you're accessing your own directly developed applications within public cloud, perhaps within AWS or Azure or even GCP. You even maybe going to your own data centers. But what you've got here is you've got a route of transport between where the user resides and the destination that they're going to get to. And what we built was the ability to look at, you know, the posture of what somebody is doing and determine whether or not, you know, this is something that the business sees as a viable way of them working. And we put the security controls in place to ensure that the people are protected, so we reduce risk for an organization. So going back into sort of old language, I guess, you know, it's effectively, you know, doing what the job of the proxy did in the past, or doing the job of the remote access VPN, or just simply, you know, providing services such as cloud access control. But because we're in this position, what we've always seen is that we see the data everywhere. So we can see the data from the user being transited either into a website or into a cloud application, into your private data centers. You know, if you upload a document somewhere, if you share a document, you know, if you're collaborating on a document with others, what we're seeing is that, you know, the core of what we all do each and every day is we're manipulating data in some form. You know, whether you're a financial organization, whether you're pharmaceutical, retail, medical, whatever, you know, vertical that you reside within, you know, recruitment, it doesn't matter. What we do is we're dealing with data. You know, and a lot of that, of course, is intellectual property. And there may also be a lot around this when it comes to compliancy as well. So I think we all went through, you know, the whole education about GDPR about 4 or 5 years ago now, where, you know, it became very apparent that, you know, we can't just share data with anybody without unknowingly doing so. You know, we have to have strict guidelines into what we do with data. And equally, you know, nobody wants that data to be compromised. You know, in the recent news, we saw what happened with Marks and Spencer's. You know, their breach prevented them from accessing their own data. You know, that was a typical ransomware attack, but it was clearly still data. So what we've seen is that we've seen this rapid pace of innovation. So everybody has moved to the cloud. You know, it's unchallenged now. We see that it's very expansive. You know, data is very much scattered everywhere, and there's a lot of fluidity in the way in which that data gets moved. And we see that, you know, AI is another mechanism clearly that, you know, our co-vendors are using as well, but equally many organizations are using to enhance their services, and that makes them more effective, more efficient, and potentially more accurate as well. And then we've seen this, you know, structural transformation of data. You know, the data is used by many in an organization in different formats. You know, I could create perhaps a Word document that's saved as a PDF that then gets translated into things such as a, you know, a PowerPoint presentation. So there's this element of lineage of data as well that comes into play. But what we absolutely know is if there's a breach, the first question that it asked is what data was exposed? You know, what happened to our data? Has it been stolen? Has it been compromised? You know, do we have our data still? So what we have to be able to do is to make sure that we can give, you know, absolute control back to an organization. So we're looking at this data in real time. And when we look at it, what we're seeing is, you know, where that data is going. So, you know, who has shared it with where and with whom? You know, what type of data is it? You know, what is the nature of that data? You know, is it compliancy related data? Is it simply marketing data? Is it, you know, advertisements? You know, are we collaborating over design information? Are you ordering particular products and stuff? And then when we know what the type of data is, you know, who has access to it? You know, if it is, you know, a confidential document and it's been sent to somebody else, who did that get sent to? And was that the right person who should have access to that? And then once we've got that data, it sits there at rest. It could rather be within a database. It could sit within an application. It can sit in your email in tray. There's all elements of what risk is there to that data once it reaches its final destination, and even does it clearly still maintain its presence on my client device as well. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to control the risk of that data. So to control the risk of it, you have to know what data is and where it resides, who has access to it, and potentially how risky that is. So if we're looking at the data itself, what we see is that we can look at data on premise. So when we say on premise, that is effectively at rest. And then we can look at the data in motion, of course. And what we see there is, well, the data in motion, that could be to pretty much any IT application, whether it be corporate or shadow IT. And when it's on premise, we talk about on premise, but on premise could equally be sat within a blob storage in Azure or an S3 bucket within AWS. And then we also understand that there's two key formats of data. The data is unstructured, not in a database, not represented by fields of mapping, simply a document with free text within it to look at an unstructured data as well. So these are all the elements that we need to look after. These are the elements we need to be aware of. And so what we've done is we've introduced our own DSPM capability. So Netskope was started 12 years ago. From day one, I joined in year 2, and at that point we already had data leakage protection. So we could look at data in real time and say, are you really supposed to be uploading that document to OneDrive? Should you be sharing that document from SharePoint? So we could already do that. And what we've done over the years, we've expanded that. But what we needed to do was to put more context around it about the what, who, where, and how. And we also needed to understand that not all data sits within the cloud either. There is still a lot of data on premise, and that data classification on premise is equally as important as the data that resides within the cloud. And what we don't want to do is to have separation of that control. So what we have done is we've extended the Netskope One platform that was already looking at data in transit, already looking at data at rest within those SaaS applications and into some of those public cloud services like AWS and Azure. And we've extended it now to be on premise as well. And so what this means, an organization now has a way within one single platform to do automatic data discovery. So that could be within a database, an SQL database on premise. We look at the automatically discovered data and we look at how we do the classification of that data. So to identify whether it's financial data, whether it's GDPR data, whether it's PCI data. We'll also automate the discovery of which users have access to it. If it's sitting in a database and we've set access to specific users, or a user has logged in to gain access to it, we can have that traceability as well. We're also looking at how those platforms are being configured. Should you be sharing from that platform? Should it be allowed to be exposed? And then continuing down the road, if you like, with these policy controls, it's all about ensuring that we can put the right level of controls in place to make sure that there is no misunderstanding of who should have access to that data. And then when we do see something that is misaligned, perhaps there's a folder that's been shared and it should have been shared to an internal group, but it hasn't, it's been shared publicly. We can do that type of auto remediation. And then traceability, when it comes to data, the biggest thing that we see is the auditability of what can be produced to provide the actual forensic evidence of what has actually happened. So providing the reports at board or C-suite levels to make sure it isn't only the network analysts and the security architects who are there to diagnose what's actually happened, but if there has been a breach, let's have a look at the trace of what actually happened between the user and that service. So with that, just to wrap this up, what do we see as a differentiator for what we bring to the table by adding DSPM into our portfolio? So we see that, we develop the platforms and we build them as a single architecture. So, I hate this term, but it gets used everywhere. Single pane of glass. It's one console. I need to change my presentations to say that. We leverage our data protection engine that we've had maturing over the last sort of 11 years. And then what we have is a way of not only doing this data discovery, data classification, but because we have this ability to do all of these inline controls, you can prevent this from happening in the first place, and you can have that direct control using the real-time policy enforcement. So thank you very much for listening. And I believe I'm handing over to David.
You are. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Right, let me just share my screen as well. Perfect. Wonderful. And loading. Come on. There we go. Appreciate everyone's time today. Thanks very much. I'm sure in this really hot weather, you've all got lots of better things to be doing, but I really appreciate your time today. I'm going to talk to you about the sort of AI threat in email security, right? We see this really being in the forefront of people's minds right now. We talked about this recently, another event for Saepio. So let me dive straight in. The first question is, are we still talking about email security in 2025? I think the resounding answer is yes to that, right? The cost of breaches has gone through the roof, right? $2.9 billion was lost to business email compromise in 2023 alone, right? FBI haven't done a later report on this one yet. That's just North American numbers, right? If you actually drill down into that report, it's really interesting. Ransomware is about 150 million. So in terms of cost to organizations, this is a big problem. When you add to the fact as well that 91% of breaches start in some form of email phishing campaign or whatever it might be, that this is something we absolutely need to shut the wide open front door on, right? These are happening regularly. The cost to organizations is huge, right? Total losses since 2013, 51 billion. Average loss per attack is about 137K. And the increases have gone up dramatically, right? We've seen alone a 3,000% increase in new phishing attacks, right? And the problem is it's getting easier for the attackers, right? They are starting to leverage the tools that we're all starting to leverage too. If you look at those attacks and how they've gone through, right, they've massively changed, right? We used to have the whole spray and pray approach, which is sending out loads of unpersonalized bulk emails. They weren't very sophisticated, but if you can send 1 million messages, you get one person engaging. It's kind of okay, right? It's not cost you any money. It's not too bad. So it was really, hit and hope. Can we get something out there? These have massively moved, right? Socially engineered attacks now are very good. They're highly personalized. They're very labor intensive. So they really think about it. I did an AI roadshow with Freaky Clown, who's an ethical hacker, recently. And he was saying it was taking about 40 hours if they were really digging into someone to try and do a socially engineered attack on them. It was quite a lot of time, but they were incredibly sophisticated, right? I can say that, as you can tell by my gray hair, I've been doing this a long time. Some of these were really good, right? When I look at them, I think to myself, even I would have thought that was a legitimate attack, a legitimate email, right? Now the problem is these AI generated ones, right? Again, still highly personalized, but largely effortless. Like we did on the AI Roadshow, he's reduced it from what he says is 40 hours on average when they were doing these things to about 5 minutes running some of these tools. Now, not all of these LLMs are available to the public, right? A lot of them may be dark ones that have data that's already out there, passwords that have been compromised, users that have been compromised. But if you think about the scattered spider attacks recently, certainly in the retail space, right? This is absolutely their MO, right? Make these very socially engineered. So the time to create these types of attacks has just dwindled dramatically, right? And I'll talk about, right, it's not all doom and gloom. There's lots of things we can do around that. But I think it's going to get harder as we go through. And I'll walk through that. But it's an interesting time right now. While we're all being asked to use more AI where we can to make ourselves more efficient, the attackers are doing exactly the same thing. We've done a lot of research in this. Like 91% of security professionals say they're seeing some sort of AI-enabled cyber attack. We're certainly seeing them at a big uptick in those recently. A really interesting one I saw not that long ago, actually, and this was, I remember 2 or 3 years ago at InfoSec, lots of people came to our stand and were saying, can you stop QR codes? And this was the big thing. And the short answer to that was always, yes, we stop QR codes, mainly because it was abnormal, right? Our AI behavioral engines knew that this wasn't normal. Lots of other email security firms suddenly went 6 months later, a bit too late in my opinion, but said, yeah, we can do QR codes now. And what they were doing was doing clever stuff, computer vision, looking at attachments or images within inside emails, looking for those QR codes and looking for bad links inside those URLs. So again, going back to known bad. But what I saw recently, which was amazing, was, and I'm sure they must have used ChatGPT or something to do this, instead of using a QR code image, they generated a QR code using ASCII art. So it was a text-based email, but when it displayed, it looked like a QR code. So they're getting very good at this, right? 97% of the people researched are going, they acknowledge that those traditional defenses just aren't effective against them. And they all agree, right? 97% again say that AI is important to email security. So generative AI, as I've said at the start, right, it's just going to make these things work. It's a good example. I do this live sometimes, but just showing you just how easy it is to do this, right? If you've got a little bit of information, like in this case, we've got an email thread history. Apologize. Can you guys all see my screen?
Yeah, I can indeed.
Okay, someone just slapped me, and now I have no idea where that screen went. 1 second. Right, I'm back in the room. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So, you can feed a lot of these things into ChatGPT really easily, right? So simple instructions, right? I'm going to say, here's some instructions of an email conversation. Please write an email response for one person to ask 2 other people to update the accounts payable system with some new bank details and a routing number. Email should be brief, sound casual, sincere, and personal, referencing a correspondence. So, right, we're going to use an email we've already got copies of. Make sure to tell these 2 people, if they've got any questions, just text me about it. Specific attack information. Okay, I'm targeting this individual. Sorry, these are the 2 people that it's coming from. I'm targeting these people. Here's the account details and a mobile phone number, right? We've also then got an existing email thread, right? Just going through, yeah, oh, sorry, I apologize, response was in San Francisco, it's been raining. So this email conversation has been going on between these 2 already. Feed it into ChatGPT, and in just a few seconds, hey, Renee, hope you're feeling much better and the rain has stopped in San Francisco. You can see ChatGPT has referenced that previous email, right? It's seen that it was raining, so just bringing that out there. Reaching out, we've recently moved our bank account information. Our new account number is X, here's the routing number. Can you update your earliest convenience? Any problems, text me, call me, whatever it might be. Right, so this took seconds, right? You can imagine just how clever and easy this can be, right? Certainly if you've got just a very basic bit of information from an existing conversation. These are very, very simple to do. We actually have a tool that you're welcome to go and look at. It's LLM OS int, and it's done by some of our internal engineers here, and it's using large language models to go and build socially engineered types of attacks. Right, you can go in there. We tested it against one of our VPs out in the Asia Pacific office, and while it doesn't write you a malicious email, what it does do is go and do all that legwork to find out about it. So we targeted an individual. We said, right, we want to write something that would get this person to click a link, and it went out and it found out this individual talked at a Gartner event in Australia. This was the topic about that. This was the call out from that topic. Blah blah. All these different information. And it was really easy for us to then use that information to build an email, again, using ChatGPT going, hey, X, saw you talking at this Gartner event. The industry needs more thought leaders like you, so massage their ego. I'm working on a very similar topic. I'm working on a white paper that I'm trying to publish. Love to get abnormalist feedback into that. Maybe you can click this link and collaborate with me on the document. Very, very simple and sounding very, very credible. This is the hardest problem. So what are we going to do, right? These AI attacks are only going to get better, right? So obviously our answer to that is obviously use the good AI to stop the bad AI. What is good AI, right? Well, we're ingesting a lot of data. One of the big things that's changed now, moving from on-prem Exchange to cloud Exchange or cloud Google Workspace, is now via their APIs. You've got access to everything, right? You can see all of those emails. You can build up a lot. If you speak to any data scientist around these things, the first thing he'll always tell you was, I'll build you a great model if I've got a lot of well-structured, well-labeled data. Plugging in for the API means we can pull in an enormous amount of telemetry so we can look for this, right? You can learn data, so you don't need to be programmed, tuned, or configured, right? No one wants to be doing this. You want it constantly updated and enriched, right? That's what we're doing here, is pulling in that data to make sure that the behaviors of your environment, and uniquely your environment and how you behave, we know what normal looks like in your environment to look for those bad things. You know, bad AI, right? They're attacking complies a list of targeted accounts and contracts. They're scraping data about targets from public sources and dark sources, right? There's lots of email addresses out there of compromised accounts that maybe you don't have the right password, but you know a little bit about them. They're going to execute scripts to feed in the generative AI tools to create phishing emails, and then they're going to really send out those really hyper-personalized emails, right? What's good AI doing, right? Well, again, we're connecting in via that API. We're ingesting, standardizing data across all of those internal sources, building up models to understand the behaviors of your environment, identify individuals in the organization, departments in the organization, how they behave, and then use those core AI detection capabilities, including things like neural networks, large language models, k-means clustering, all these kinds of things to really understand and iterate on what is normal look in your environment. Look for those exceptions to the rule when these emails that come in that to the human eye look very normal. One of the other things a lot of secure email gateways have said for the longest time is that, you know, we're looking at, you know, somewhere between 500 and 1,000 data points per every email. You know, typically they're looking at that sort of known bad approach, which is like we used to do with antivirus, but obviously we don't do that anymore. Now we have Crowdstrike, for example, and we're behavioral based things. We're looking to see what something does, not what something is. When we're looking at this from a normal perspective, we're looking somewhere between 40 and 90,000 signals per email. And that makes a big, big difference. And again, it's pulling in that right data, right? Behavioral modeling, looking at individuals, vendors, suppliers, people like that. You can also pull in additional information. You know, one of the things we've got is a really good relationship with CrowdStrike. We've got a bidirectional API in this case, right, where the CrowdStrike identity platform, we can send them information about accounts we've seen compromised and vice versa. So if you're using both us and CrowdStrike, it'd be really useful. And again, it just adds data to that to give you these really high fidelity alerts, right? We want to make sure to protect you against these things. Let's have a quick look at some of these real AI generated attacks that we've been stopping, right? You know, this is a great one, right? You know, regret to inform you your Facebook page has been pounded in violation, blah, 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 right? I'm sure every one of you have seen these things. Now, right now, the beauty is you can pretty much to a degree feed that back into an AI platform and say, what's the probability this was written by AI? And you can see here, you know, it's possibly AI, likely to be written by AI if you feed it into things like ChatGPT 0 or OpenAI. You know, you can see and get the results back from these platforms, almost use them against themselves. But clearly in our case here, you can see quite quickly, right? You know, we're always looking at sort of three pillars: this unusual sender, unusual send domain, it's a weird send off, right? We can quickly identify these things. Now, again, I'm going to show you another example here, right? You know, oh, I hope this message feels you well. I want to update the direct deposit information, right? We've seen these a lot, the payroll fraud one, and I'm sure some of you have as well, where it's very hard not to know that employee X doesn't have that weird Gmail address of 43962jw@gmail.com because they're a new employee, right? They might be emailing in. But again, you can feed that back in and understand, you know, what's the chances, right? Well, slightly AI, likely really entirely by AI, right? The green is telling you how much in probability that's going to be AI generated. A vendor fraud, right? Again, sending something from a supplier. This is the biggest bane of customers' lives now, is suppliers being compromised. We've seen both with Marks and Spencers and others, right? You know, it's part of the supply chain that's been the biggest problem for them right now. And we're constantly looking at what we call vendor fraud, which is supply chain compromise. Often they may have been compromised through phishing or whatever, and they're sending a perfectly valid email to you. So things like SPF, DKIM, DMARC, all the normal sort of legacy email security controls, it's going to be fine. It's going to go straight through because it is actually being sent from that supplier. But again, you can look at it and see what's the chance this is written by AI and understand that very quickly. Now, I think it's worth pointing out here what I think is going to change. Let me go back. What I think is going to change here is, you know, as I said earlier at the start, we're being asked to use AI in our everyday life, right? This is going to become more and more common. So things like Gemini, Copilot, we're going to be writing our emails using ChatGPT. So some of the tools that other people are using, just simply going into third-party results to do it, they're not going to be able to do it anymore because our emails are going to be AI generated, even though they're legitimate. So, please have a look, see the attacks you're missing. For the beauty of the normal is because we go in via the API, we can go directly into your back end. We don't have to disrupt any of your existing secure email gateways or Microsoft controls or Google controls. We'll only show you those things that they're missing. So no MX record changes, nothing around those. It's very, very easy to see what's going on in your environment. So hopefully that's shed a few lights on these AI attacks and AI generated, and hopefully how you can see how AI can protect you in the future. So really appreciate it. And I will pass on back to everyone now. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks, Dave. Yeah, certainly something we've certainly seen within Saepio across our customer bases. There's and there's lots of headline stats that you must have seen around, like I suppose, the rise of these personalized one, and it's a lot of it down to just as you say, it's like the much lower barrier of entry, which is a scary thought. But no, really appreciate the insight. Chris, over to yourself if you're there.
I am indeed. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Second. Okay. Good afternoon, folks. Yeah, I echo in the remark. Thanks for staying to the end when you could be on the lawn sipping pims in this wonderful weather. So thanks for sticking around. By way of introduction, my name is Chris Beckett. I'm a senior solutions engineer here at Wiz. I've been at Wiz for nearly 2.5 years. But in the first part of my career, for about 13 years, I was in operational roles. So I've quite a lot of accumulated scar tissue in terms of the sorts of problems that you face. What I want to talk about today is, you probably know us best for the cloud security posture management capabilities that we have in the Wiz platform. But what we want to talk about today is our new capability called Wiz Defend. This is a cloud detection and response feature, which really builds on the existing capabilities that we have within the existing Wiz platform. So just really kind of to step back and just have a look at the wider picture of how Wiz Defend fits in with the rest of the Wiz portfolio. One of the great strengths of Wiz is that it's a single unified platform. I know you've heard that a lot already today, but that really makes a difference because we're built on top of a security graph, and that gives us a lot of knowledge and a lot of context around what's in my cloud, what relationships does it have with something else, and we can tie that together in a very rich way. So this center kind of use case was where we kind of started off. That was typically for GRC use cases, cloud security, vulnerability management, those types of things. As time went on, customers then wanted to kind of shift left, and obviously mitigation of risk is better to prevent it than anything else. It's obviously quicker, it's cheaper. If we can stop that risk from getting into production, that's what we want to do. So Wiz Code was created especially to do this, using things like IDE plugins. We scan version control systems. We sit in the CI/CD pipeline. We perform analysis. We can stop builds that don't meet compliance. And that addresses that particular risk. But then we brought in Wiz Defend recently, which is kind of almost like the last mile, if you like. So as well as having the two capabilities on the left, we're never really going to be in a position where we completely eliminate cloud risk. We're never going to be down to zero. So what Wiz Defend allows us to do is to build on the capabilities that we have with Wiz Cloud, which is the context-rich information on the security graph and the relationship between different resources. We can optionally augment that with runtime signals from our runtime sensor, which we'll get to in a little bit. And then bringing all that together in a meaningful way means when you have incidents or you need to perform incident response in the cloud, you have all the information that you need at your fingertips to really quickly address that issue and resolve it. So kind of a cliche, but the cloud does change everything for SecOps in respect of it's a completely different threat landscape. Back in the days when I first started, it was really around the sort of network perimeter. A little bit of identity in there as well kind of crept in later on, but then the cloud is less kind of network focused. There's still some of that to a degree, but it's a lot more around identity, non-human identities. It's around lateral movement even between clouds. So for example, you could have an AWS access key and secret sat on an Azure VM. If someone gets into that Azure VM, they have potential then to cross boundaries into your AWS environment and perform whatever tasks they've got permissions to do there as well. Automation, we've already heard this a lot today. We know they're using the robots against us as well, so we need to be aware of that. We need to be able to mitigate that. And we also need to factor in other particular scenarios, such as maybe like a container escape within a Kubernetes cluster. But really, the whole point being is that teams ingest a huge amount of data from lots of different sources. They have to normalize that, they have to correlate it, and it's a time-consuming business. And then once you then correlated it, you still have to act on it, maybe get it to the right person to triage, and then you have to resolve it. So there's a number of processes that we have to step through that we really need to try and improve. The center pillar talks about inadequate tooling. So what we kind of mean by that is that SIEMs do a great job, and they've been around a long time. They're a very mature technology. They're well understood. Organizations tend to have a large investment into these tooling sets, but they're primarily built around traditional signals, maybe like syslogs coming in, maybe some endpoint security logs. They're not always in the same format, and again, it's a problem. It's a bit of hassle to try and wrangle those into a format that you can query accurately and then actually perform playbooks and remediation on top of. But then, even if I get signals from, like say, an endpoint agent, I don't necessarily know how that fits into the cloud. So I might not know which region it's in, if it has tags on it, which instance size it is, if it has internet exposure, those sorts of things as well. So there may be some factors on that resource that I'm not aware of when I pull in those logs from other sources. And then the investigation can get quite complex as well. One of the key kind of tenets of Wiz is that, as well as having that context and having the right information at the right time, it's got to go to the right person in order to be resolved. And what that means is that if there's a problem with a particular workload or application, we've got to get that to someone who really understands that application and really cares about it, so that when we go to them and say, we think there's a problem that you need to resolve, when they get that information, it's meaningful and actionable, and means that they can quickly look at it and go, yeah, this is accurate, maybe no, it's not accurate, but then be able to perform incident response on top of that and make sure that the mean time to recovery is actually kept really low. So this is kind of a high-level view of Wiz Defend, and this is what we built specifically for the cloud. So in the center, you can see two very specific aspects, which are the Wiz security graph, which kind of underpins everything that we do, and then the Wiz signals lake. So just to kind of break those two different concepts out and explain what we mean by those and why they're important, if we look at the security graph, we already talked about the fact that we connect natively into your cloud environment. We perform a lot of analysis. We fetch information about all the resources in your cloud. We can augment and those findings by looking at things like vulnerability and internet exposure, and tying these different potential risk vectors together in what we call a toxic combination. What we've done with Wiz Defend is actually take that a step further, because we already have this large body of information, and as we said, a lot of those pieces of information that we might not necessarily have otherwise, things about which cloud provider it's in, which region it's in, which instance type it is, if it has internet exposure, if it has sensitive data on it or secrets. All of this stuff is really important, that when we raise an alert and we have a potential threat, we have all the information at our fingertips and we're good to go. So this signals lake kind of overlays on top of the security graph and takes what we already know and adds information that we've brought in from this column over on the left. So we will get runtime signals from, maybe it's the Wiz sensor, it could be Crowdstrike, it could be Sentinel-1. There are a host of other different tools we can bring into that. There's obviously a lot of cloud telemetry involved as well. So we can see a lot of the major cloud platforms that are listed on here, but thinking kind of outside of that as well, we'd be looking at things like maybe Google Workspace or Okta. You can see Databricks in here as well. You can see ServiceNow. So there are a number of other different places that we would be bringing cloud telemetry in from. And also on the bottom left here, you can see code to cloud risk context as well. So we're bringing in signals from the GitHubs and the GitLabs in here as well, amongst other tools, which are all part of kind of the bigger picture. But what we do within Wiz Defend is we give you a really quick time to value, because it's great having all of this information and correlating it and everything else, but then if you're just giving kind of like a blank canvas and you kind of left alone to write your own rules, again, that doesn't really solve the problem. So what we have with WizDefend is this capability to use out-of-the-box rules and behavior analytics, so we know that what is normal and what is abnormal within a cloud environment, and we can quickly analyze actually what's going on with the threat and how important it is. So this is kind of like a bit of a before slide, and I realize it's quite busy, so I'm not going to spend too long on this. I'm also conscious of time. But on the left-hand side, you can see all of these different potential sources: CloudTrail, EKS logs, Okta logs, Snowflake audit logs. There's other information coming in, maybe from Wiz or another CNAP, maybe from endpoint tools such as CrowdStrike and SentinelOne. All of this other information from identity providers, and we're funneling that into a SIEM. And again, we kind of have to normalize that, and we have to correlate it, and that's very time consuming. We also then have to build processes on top of this. We have to build maybe automation playbooks and runbooks. Maybe we're just sending it straight out to a SIEM and we're kind of dealing with it once it gets there. But there's a lot of heavy lift kind of involved in this. And from a cloud perspective, again, this is kind of very time consuming. This is kind of the after slide, if you like. So this is how WizDefend kind of overlays into that. And one of the key things that I'd like to emphasize is that we're not here to kind of rip and replace anything. We're not here to do kind of bot lift replacements or anything like that. We're augmenting the tool set that you have, because we realize, you know, it's kind of you need a kind of arsenal of tools, if you like, to perform security analysis and response, and Wiz is part of that. So if you deploy WizDefend within your environment, you don't have to kind of rip out your SIEM. You don't have to rip out your SOAR tool. If you've got established processes baked into that, if you've got a big investment in that and you want to leverage that, we can absolutely fit into that, and you don't have to really change anything. So kind of looking on the left-hand side here on the cloud side, so these are all the different sources that we ingest. You don't have to do these all at once. You can do these piecemeal if you like. So if we look at IDPs at the top, we've got Okta and Google and Entra. For AWS, pretty much every service seems to have its own log. So you've got CloudTrail, S3 data events, VPC flow logs, etc. Azure activity logs, GCP VPC flow logs. I'm kind of cherry picking some of these now, obviously. And then the pink boxes, we can augment those signals with what we can pick up from runtime as well. So in this particular example, we're using the Wiz sensor, so we can see real-time processes on an endpoint. We can capture what's going on, and we can feed that back into WizDefend. And then the center part of that, you see there, the actual WizDefend piece. That's the engine that does the correlation, that does the deduplication, that does the analysis, that brings all of the context together, so that when you look at these detections and you look at the threat, you've got everything that you need to kind of get going straight away and be able to triage that and act on it. What that might mean is sending that to a SIEM. So like we said a couple of times already, if you have a Splunk or a Sentinel or a Google Chronicle, for example, or a CrowdStrike, you can carry on using that. Nothing really needs to change. We just send that information down from WizDefend that's ready for you to go. You don't have to do any additional work on. That then feeds into your detection and response, into your SecOps team. Maybe you send that out to a SOAR tool, you know, a Times or a Talk or something like that, and run some playbooks on top of it, and you can perform that response. But the key thing is it's augmenting what you already have with Wiz Cloud with the security graph, and we can integrate with the existing tools and investments that you've made within your SOC environments. So just really quickly to close, WizDefend is still relatively new. It's only been out a few months, but we already have some good customer use cases that you can reference if you want to look at them. Two that I want to call out here. There's a company called Pros that works on a price optimization platform and revenue management. They've seen a very quick time to value with WizDefend just by kind of switching it on and ingesting the different log sources. We also have Matillion as well, who are a data integration platform. Again, they've kind of switched that on and seen a very quick time to value. One final Other point that we've had recently is we had a workshop with a UK government organisation. They're looking at WisDefend. They already have a big investment into a well-known SIEM tool. They also have a big investment into a well-known ITSM tool. Their processes are extremely mature. Their investment is big. They don't want to change any of that because they know that it works. What they want to do is take that enrichment from WisDefend and that correlation and that deduplication and bring it into those tools and be able to use those in the regular way. So they're already seeing value in what we can provide in terms of the information that we send from Defend into those tools, and they really don't have to change anything in that respect. So I realized this was quite a quick drive through what we have on WisDefend. If you want to see more of it, you can go to wiz.io for more information. You can also reach out to any of the account teams or your partner for any more information or a demo or anything, a POV or anything like that. But with that, that's everything I have. So I'm going to hand back to Duncan.
Nice one. Thanks, Chris, and appreciate you whizzing through that at the end. But yeah, I think certainly what we're hearing from customers, obviously effective risk reduction in cloud is always going to be key, but we have a lot of conversations with security leaders who are sometimes put in quite a challenging position. Like they don't want to be seen to be too heavy-handed and putting too many guardrails up and, you know, prohibiting developer productivity essentially. So they're sometimes having to make like quite difficult decisions around that sort of classic sort of productivity and security trade-off. And I think where the decision has been made in some cases where they're to accept more risk, then having something in place that's going to monitor and detect for, you know, the bad things that may or may not happen is going to become more and more important. But yeah, appreciate you running through that. And I suppose with that we're up at time. So yeah, thanks everyone for jumping on. And as we keep saying, a very nice day. We'll forward over some the recording and stuff of the session today. But like I say, appreciate everyone's time and enjoy the rest of your day. So thanks very much.